Hi everybody, my name is Peter Watson and I'm co-founder of outdoor travel blog Atlas and Boots. I'm also a Highlander ambassador. I'm actually out on a hike at the moment. I've had my first shower in days, so I thought this might be a good time to talk to you about how to choose a tent. Now, before you buy your tent, it's worth asking yourself a few really important questions. Think about when you're going to be hiking, where you're going to be hiking, and what the weather's going to be like. Are you just going on an overnight hike, or are you going on a multi-day trip? What other equipment will you be carrying? Because maybe you need to go lighter if you're carrying lots of gear. What activities you're going to be doing during the trip? What sort of terrain you're going to be pitching on? Are you staying at a campsite, or are you wild camping throughout? Are you going with someone, because maybe you can split the gear between you? And also, are you going completely off grid, or will you have access to some amenities during the trip? Knowing the answers to these questions will really help you decide on the sort of tent design and the type of tent that you need. For example, ultralight hiker going on a trip in Croatia in the summer, for example, will need a very different setup to somebody going trekking across Greenland in winter. Next, I'm going to talk to you about the different types of tent that are available. The most popular type of tent is the dome tent. That's a kind of general camping tent. It's the most popular design. It's not as strong, technical, light or weatherproof as other designs, but it's easier to pitch. It's often more spacious. The way they're designed is that they have two poles that cross, normally at the highest point, the apex of the dome, and they're used in a wide variety of circumstances, from backpacking trips to car camping to festivals. The next tent I'm going to talk to you about are geodesic tents, which is a bit of a mouthful to say. They're the strongest type of tent design, and they're ideal for demanding expeditions. Think about the North Face tents you've seen on the side of Everest, that sort of thing. They feature two or more poles that crisscross. They're much stronger, which means they're heavier to carry. Backpackers tend to prefer lighter ones than that because they're a little bit over the top. They also come with the fly and the inner tent, the fly sheet and the inner tent separate, which means they're quite difficult to pitch in tough conditions. When you see them on expeditions, it's usually because 2 or 3 people are pitching them together. You probably don't need to buy one of these tents. They're for more extreme conditions. The next type of tent I want to talk about are tunnel tents. Now, you've seen a lot of these. They're really popular among hikers and trekkers because they're quick to pitch and they're pretty light. They come with the inner tent and the fly sheet attached, which means they're fast and quick and easy to pitch, especially in bad weather. They're good for backpackers and they can be used in lots of different locations. Tunnel tents also provide quite a high space to weight ratio. They're a really popular design and I've used them a lot. The next type of tent I want to talk to you about are ultralight tents or shelters or tarps. Now, they're designed for hikers to cover ground as quickly as possible, and so they should weigh under 1 kilogram at least. Some go down to sort of 600-700 grams, which are incredibly light. They're not as waterproof, they're not as strong, and they're not as resilient as other designs, but they're great for shorter hiking trips when you can rely on pretty good weather. For example, when I go away just for a night or two and I know the weather's going to be good, I just take a tarp with me, my 2 trekking poles and a couple of pegs, and I rig it up together like that. Now, the final type of tent I want to talk about is a hybrid tent, which is the sort of tent that I've got. Hybrid tents incorporate 2 or more designs. Now, they still have the 2-pole crossing point at the top, but the points are interconnected, making them much more stronger. They also have an inner tent and a fly sheet connected, just like a tunnel tent, but they attach to the pole system on the outside, which makes them much quicker to pitch, and it makes them easier to pitch in really bad weather. The downside is that with all these little extra bits and bobs, they are a bit heavier, but I think I prefer them because it just makes them so much easier to pitch. Next, I'm going to talk to you about some key features to look out for when you're buying a tent. The first thing is the ground sheet. This should be attached to the inner tent and has to be totally waterproof because it prevents all the water coming up from underneath. It's essential that all the seams are sealed. The best tent designs tend to have the major seams all elevated off the floor for better protection. Next up is the inner tent that should be attached to the ground sheet. Now this protects you when you're inside, but it should be light and breathable and constructed of a mix of solid fabric and mesh for ventilation, so it helps to get the air in and out. Next up is the fly sheet, which is the outer cover which protects the inner tent and everyone inside it. Now, of course, this needs to be lightweight, but it's more important that it's durable and waterproof. Next, I'm going to talk to you about something called a hydrostatic head. It's sometimes called a water column or a polyurethane coating. It's measured in millimeters and it basically tells you how waterproof a tent is. 1,500 millimeters is the legal limit for a tent to be classified as waterproof. Now, a rating of 2,000 to 300 will cope with most weather, but really intense tents, again those North Face ones on the side of Everest, they'll have a hydrostatic head of up to 10,000 millimeters on the ground sheet and over 5,000 millimeters on the fly sheet. Next up is the vestibule or the porch, and this is the protected area which is just inside the tent. It's used to store things, and particularly dirty boots and wet clothing, anything that you don't want inside the tent. They can also be used as an external living space, so if you're really short on space, somebody could sleep out here as well. Tent poles. Now, tent poles form the structure of your tent, and so they should be strong and reliable. Avoid fiberglass poles because they just won't withstand strong winds. Aluminium is ideal for most situations as it's pretty strong and pretty light. Never buy steel. It's only really used for bigger tents which are much heavier. Poles should collapse down and into smaller sections so they're easier to handle, and for ease of folding and packing, they're usually connected by a little elastic cord that runs through the middle of them. Next up are guy lines, which add another point of contact between the tent and the ground. These give a little bit extra stability. There's also guy line attachments, where the guy line attaches to the tent. These should be reinforced and have strong seams as they come under intense strain and have the potential to tear. The next thing is doors. Now, fewer doors make for a lighter tent, so the more doors you have, they're going to be heavier because they have more zips and they have more fabric included. That said, extra entrances are a lot more practical, especially if there's more than one of you. The inner tent doors usually have a mix of mesh and fabric, and the mesh gives you a bit more ventilation, which also keeps the mosquitoes out. Now, when it comes to ventilation, a well ventilated tent stops condensation from building up, so it keeps everyone inside nice and dry and nice and comfortable. The inner tent usually uses essentially what is mosquito netting or mesh to achieve this. Fly tents will ideally have a hooded opening which can sometimes be opened from the inside, which also helps to let air circulate. Finally, there's storage pockets, which are usually meshed compartments in the corners or the ends of the tents. These are ideal for stashing a head torch or anything that you might need to hand quickly. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about today are just some accessories that you can get for your tent which will make life a bit easier. The first thing is a gear loft or a mesh or fabric interior storage compartment, which is at the top of the tent, and that's useful for keeping a few things in. The next thing I want to talk to you about is lightweight pegs. So titanium, aluminium or even plastic pegs are the easiest way you can save some weight when you're camping. Now, it's also worth carrying a repair kit. A good tent should come with a repair kit for fixing up any fabric that might get damaged, any tears or anything like this, but it should also come with a tent pole splint, which is a temporary solution to a broken or damaged pole. Finally, if you're carrying a really lightweight tent, you might want to consider a footprint. A footprint is laid beneath the tent floor and provides an extra layer of protection from either rugged terrain or extra water that's coming up. Again, most tents should be good enough for this, but if you've got like a really light tent, then a footprint is worth bringing along. Right, that's it from me. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you found it useful. And once again, I look forward to seeing you out there on the trails.